Okay. All right. When studying the history of anti-Semitism, there is now a growing awareness that its messages are not simply conveyed in language, but also via images. A particularly striking case study showing the impact of discourse and images on actions and consequences is that of the Supplément illustré d'Anti-Juifs Algériens and its role in the crise anti-Juive in Algiers and Algeria at the end of the 19th century. The Anti-Juif Algérien and its Supplément illustré were the official papers of the Anti-Juif League and carried its messages, meetings, and reports. Both papers carried announcements of the League, reports of demonstrations, polemics, and calls for boycotts against Jews, ads for the anti-Juif merchandise. There were anti-Juif cigarettes, there were anti-Juif drinks, there were all sorts of merchandise that one could buy, and list of League-backed political candidates. Politically, their goal was unclear beyond down with the Jews, but one of their editors and main contributors, Lucien Chaise, identified himself as a socialist, as did other anti-Semites in Algeria, among them René Viviani, Fernand Grégoire, Daniel Seron, and Victor Spielmann. At the end of the 19th century, there were a number of newspapers bearing the title Anti-Juif. While their distribution, proliferation, and impact increased during the Dreyfus Affair, this title began appearing prior to this, starting in Paris in 1881. The Supplément was first published in March 27, 1897, and ran until 1902. That is the Supplément du Anti-Juif Algérien. This paper appeared once a week for the first 2 years and then irregularly after that. While I do not have exact circulation numbers for it, its main paper, the Anti-Juif Algérien, had a circulation of approximately 20,000. The two papers had an impact far beyond their numbers and helped catapult the political careers of two of their editors and main writers, Max Regis, who became mayor of Algiers in 1898, and Lucien Chaise, also known by the pen name Jacques de France, who became mayor of Mustapha shortly thereafter. Max Regis was the son of Italian immigrants and a law student at the University of Algiers. He started on the path of an anti-Semitic career politician when he organized students at the law school in 1897, where he led protests and riots against the appointment of a Jewish law professor. After he was suspended from the university for 2 years, he relaunched the Anti-Juif Algérien in 1897. This paper was originally published from 1890 to 1891 by Eugène de Redon, that is, prior to the Dreyfus Affair. This paper was, the other contributor was Lucien Chaise, who was an autodidact and former railroad worker who acted as the ideologue of the Anti-Juif and Regis associate. Chaise also wrote various pamphlets, some of which included Liberté, Justice, Vérité, Abat les Juifs, and L'expulsion des Juifs. The other two associates on the paper were Max Regis' brother, Louis, and Fernand Lafitte, the editorial secretary. The drawings were signed by, and were drawn by, Edouard Herzig, the French-Algerian painter and caricaturist. The lead article of the first issue of this supplement introduced the readership to these four bandits, starting with Regis, who was described in the following terms, I quote, quill, sword, explosive, incandescent lava, heroism, self-abnegation, irremissible hatred of the Jew, a generous heart, all the qualities of a man, and man is in all caps, are condensed in this breast of bravery. His name is engraved from now on in letters of gold in the history of anti-Semitism, which will count for one of the most beautiful pages of world history, because it will be the brilliant awakening of pure freedom, unquote. Lucien Chaise was described as an uncontestable master of the pen with a powerful mind, grinding machine of ideas, and equally ardent in his hatred of the Jew and tyrants, drainers of gold and contemporary society, decayed to its marrow by the Jew. Chaise's political platform, in addition to plundering and expelling Jews and executing those who were found to have more than 1 million francs, consisted of a social program of creating social insurance for children and the elderly, the unemployed, and disabled workers. He called himself a Christian socialist and said he was inspired by Victor Hugo and Edouard Dumont. Both he and Regis considered themselves disciples of Fernand Grégoire, the founder of the Ligue Socialiste Anti-Juif and editor of the Radical Algérien. Fernand Grégoire migrated to Algeria during the period of the Second Empire and referred to himself as a fighter in the spirit of the French Revolution, a secularist without prejudice towards any people. However, after, quote, observing Jews in, quote, our Algeria, he came to the conclusion that they were deadly parasites, adorers of the golden calf, keepers of all the gold, and, quote, kings of the epoch, end quote. That last phrase was that of a book title published by the utopian socialist anti-Semite Alphonse Tousnel in 1847. Grégoire published his own denunciation of Algerian Jews in 1888. He died in the 1890s and was buried in Mustafa. At the memorial service for him in September 1897, Regis addressed a crowd of 700 and provoked a riot. Looking closely at the rhetoric itself, which I think it's important to do, one can see a mixture of racial hatred among claims of universalism and concern for, quote, humanity, a combination of ideas conventionally associated with the left and the right, and an appeal to populist resentment against those who are perceived as being, quote, hoarders of gold and parasites. While anti-Semitic currents, publications, and even agitation had occurred throughout the history of colonial Algeria, they received added impetus in the wake of the Dreyfus affair and attracted thousands of supporters in the three main cities of Algiers, Oran, Constantine, and throughout Algeria. The violence of anti-Semitic agitation was particularly pronounced in Algiers, with Regis being the most prominent ringleader. After he led the student riots and strikes that resulted in a Jewish professor's dismissal and Regis' suspension from the university as a result of rioters destroying university property and threatening the city with more violence, his career took off. His defiance of authority won in popularity throughout Algiers. Between January 16th and 27th of the following year, he led demonstrations and riots that resulted in 400,000 francs worth of property damage to Jewish shops and homes, several injuries, and 1 Jewish fatality. Thanks to his rising popularity and charisma, Regis was elected mayor and began a systematic attack on the local Jewish community, which included boycotts, dismissal of Jewish municipal workers, and denial of services, including vital services such as medical care, to Jewish residents. Jews were banned from public places and businesses, all with the intention of making life impossible for them in the city in order to encourage their immigration. Regis repeatedly called for their expulsion and even extermination. Anti-Semitic candidates took over municipalities and other cities and towns in Algeria and began implementing the same policies. This agitation continued until some Algerian anti-Semites began demanding autonomy and even independence from France. It was at this point that the new Governor General Le Ferrier was able to begin exploiting the rift between the neo-French, that is, European immigrants and their descendants who were calling for a break with France, and the French immigrants and their descendants who remained loyal to the métropole. Even within the ranks of the Anti-Juif Algérienne, there was a political split when Regis turned on Chaise, warning that they would come to blows once the Jews were eliminated. But while they were in association, they shared a deep racial hatred of Jews, which expressed itself in discourse and images. Anti-Judaism was the glue that cemented their alliance and for a while made their political careers. It combined elements of religious and secular, economic and racial attacks. This can be seen in the discourse and images. Marta Bonucci has discussed the effectiveness of this combination of visual image and words. As she points out, the anti-Semitic caricature synthesizes, simplifies, concentrates, and standardizes its message, facilitating the memorization of stereotypes, thus creating a more immediate emotional impact. Its evolution was related to the problem of designating Jews in post-emancipation Europe once the outward signs, such as distinct clothing, disappeared. Over the course of the 19th century, this stereotypic image was crystallized. Among the most recognizable traits was the hook nose, and added to this were the following characteristics, quote, striking ears, and, quote, the soft hand of the hypocrite and traitor, end quote. Edouard Drumon's La France Juive did much to diffuse such an image, along with the illustrated supplement of his Libre Parole. In colonial Algeria, the Supplement did much the same, mobilizing its readers by inviting them to contribute photographs of Jews in order to, quote, surprise them and shut them up, end quote. Once established, these traits were endlessly recycled from one publication to another and from one locale and country to another. Both the images and the text showed the continuity between past religiously based prejudices, conventionally referred to as anti-Judaism, and modern anti-Semitism. This is true despite the advance of secularism in the course of the 19th century, and this can be seen in the anti-Semitic imagery contained in 19th century religious educational material for young children. Such an early childhood formative catechism could continue to have influence on those who later became secularists in adult life, and this could explain why the socialist leader and future Dreyfusard, Jean Jaurès, easily accepted anti-Semitic claims made against Jews in colonial Algeria. This background and prior prejudice also existed among neo-French such as Max Regis. Some researchers have seen the conflict between these new French citizens and French d'origine as the motivating factor in the rise of anti-Semitism in colonial Algeria. In addition to this, another source of inspiration was the popular anti-Semitic traditions of the countries and regions of origin, in addition to France, Italy, and Spain. However, along with the medieval and early modern religiously based sources, one needs to consider the rise of scientific racism in the course of the 19th century, particularly the racialized discourse surrounding cultural differences and national identities in general, and racialization of Jews in particular. The metamorphosis of the wandering Jew from a literary type and stereotype into a pathological phenomenon is one example of this. These notions were translated into social policy when anti-Semites took over municipalities and tried to eliminate Jewish children from the school system, claiming they carried, quote, dangerous diseases. At the popular level, the difference was not only indicated simply as a distinct racial type, but entered the realm of zoological, when anti-Semitic caricatures taking on various animal traits, placing them in the realm of the sub or non-human. Added to the hook nose and prominent ears were the familiar medieval horns and conflating Jews with the devil, a tail. The resulting portrait could be visualized in the gargoyles of Notre Dame, a familiar landmark and visual image from the mid-19th century, when they were incorporated into the restoration of the Notre Dame Cathedral. And unfortunately, all the images that I have of that, I don't have copyright over them. So I'm not able to show them to you. But the one that I'm particularly thinking about is the demons that are dragging the sinners to hell over the portals of the Last Judgment. I'm hoping eventually I'll be able to have a photograph of that myself. The front page of the first issue of the Supplement contains a caricature by Herzig that covers the entire page. It consists of a drawing of turbaned Jews with hook noses in what was assumed to be local traditional dress, North African slippers, looking like cartoon renditions of medieval court jesters and pages, or the Sultan's slave, carrying a bourgeois gentleman, Louis Lapine, the Governor General of Algeria at the time, on a litter. The portrait of the governor is lifelike with distinct features, somewhat recognizable to the readers, while the Jews all have the same face and are drawn as cartoon characters with hook noses and slanted closed eyes, drawn as servants, slaves, or subhuman. And I have an example of that. here. So this is from the front. This is from the front. Oh, oops, I'll get to that later. So this is from the front page of the first issue of the supplement. And let me see if I can. Okay, and then the caption is, he dreamed sweetly about he dreamed about the sweetnesses of the ballad in Palanquin under the caress of the fan, regrettably. Okay. The last page of the same issue also contains a drawing of the four bandits, all drawn as lifelike portraits, while heads of Jews sit perched across the top of the page on a line looking almost like crows and along the side, the left side margin. Regis holds a spear pointing in the direction of one of them, and I'm talking about this one right here, pointing in the direction of one of them, and another Jew alongside in the side margin sticks his tongue out in a manner similar to a statue of one of the gargoyles on the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and unfortunately I don't have a picture of that, but it is on the cover of a book by Michael Camille. Okay, The Gargoyles of Notre Dame, Medievalism and the Monsters of Modernity. So bringing together both medieval and the modern in the course of the 19th century. The image of pen as sword is taken to a more violent level in the second issue with the addition of a banner showing a pen skewering a Jew from his rear to his head. And I'm talking about this one now. This image appears as the background of the masthead of the supplement from the second issue to the December 11th, 1898 issue, when it was replaced by a pen sword skewering a Jew and the Governor General. Its violence corresponded to the increasing venom of Regis' rhetoric and the increased violence of the anti-Semitic riots in the course of 1898. The dichotomy between the pen and the sword, maintained in the maxim, "The pen is mightier than the sword," is collapsed both in this image and in the description of Regis in the lead article of the first issue as pen as sword, aimed at vanquishing the Jew and rescuing humanity from him. As stated above, Regis' rhetoric also escalated and included threats of genocide. Caricatures of Jews and anti-Semitism did not end with Regis' political career, but resurfaced in the 1930s and, of course, during the Vichy regime. They played an important role in conveying violent anti-Semitic messages, particularly when they were carried by the mass media, which in the 19th century consisted of mass circulation newspapers. At the end of the 19th century, popular anti-Semitism was the glue that united neo-French and French from France from both the, quote, left and the right in colonial Algeria. Prior religiously based traditions of anti-Judaism and their recycling in text and in statuary combined with modern racially based anti-Semitism. These images, ideas, and stereotypes express themselves in acute and extreme violence in colonial Algeria, perhaps due to the colonial setting, but their origins lay in Europe. But their impact continued into the 20th century and were eventually rendered in Arabic and have lingering effects to this day. And for that footnote, I have two books in mind, one that was published in Tangier in 2000 and one in Algeria in 2001 that focused on the history of North African Jewry that was written in Arabic and were blatantly anti-Semitic. And in fact, I did a WorldCat search in Arabic a couple of years ago. I searched Jews, North Africa, and history, looking for books that were published in Arabic. And I found 20, basically. This is not a random representative sample, but I just pulled off the first 20 with those words in the title. And I looked at them. And 16 out of the 20 were blatantly anti-Semitic. And they were published in Syria, Lebanon, Algeria, and Morocco. Thank you.